Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest show. My name is Bruce Markison. Our co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria, is behind the curtain tonight, if you will, but listening to every word, checking on every mistake I make, and correcting things on the fly. We're back after a 2-week hiatus. We had to take a couple of weeks off. First of all, I went to Monster Bash one weekend, so I was not available to do the show that weekend. And also, Tracy's been involved in a major house move from one mansion to another. So that's been an important thing that's been going on. Now settled in the new home, still in Canada, still north of the border, but in a different geographic location. I'm still in Cooperstown, New York, and very glad to be with you. And on this week's show, we're going to do something a little bit different, but with a familiar name and voice. Our guest this week is Brian Forrest, also known as Toothpickings. And he is an expert on vampires within popular culture. He has joined us at least twice in the past. He has authored numerous articles on the subject of vampires, written for the Dracula Beyond Stoker literary magazine. That's Tucker Christine's very fine production, and has just issued a reprint of a little-known but important book from 19th century horror history called The Black Vampyre. And for those watching on YouTube, this is the copy of this reprint of the book. We're going to tell you more about that. We're going to have Brian explain it as well. So written in 1819, The Black Vampyre is the first book to feature a vampire of African descent. And it's also believed by many to be the first vampire story set in America. We're going to get into depth on this subject of The Black Vampyre. And to do so, we welcome our guest, Toothpickings, Brian Forrest. Brian, how are you?
Hi, Bruce. How are you doing? Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear from you. You're on the road. You're getting ready for a convention appearance coming up. You're at a designated hotel that is in an unknown location.
Yes,
No
I'm in
camera
an
available.
undisclosed grave somewhere in the Midwest, getting ready for the Convergence Convention that's held in Minneapolis over the 4th weekend.
Very nice. And it's a good time of year to be in Minneapolis. Families area. Summers can be very pleasant. Winters, sometimes a bit of a different story. So, Brian, let's jump right into this topic.
When we have them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this book or novella, short book, The Black Vampyre, it's not a lost piece of literature in the way that a silent film is lost, where nobody could see it or experience it, but it is an obscure story. And it was one that had really been largely forgotten until, I think, 2020, when it was put back into print. And now you have issued your own printing of it, along with an essay explaining it. You've also got some other writings, including poetry, written by the author, Uriah Derrick D'Arcy. We're going to talk more about him. And one of the reasons that this has become a forgotten piece of literature is because this author really became such a mysterious figure after putting the book out in 1819. Is that what motivated you to issue this reprint along with the essay offering your views on the story? Is that what you wanted to do, to kind of shed some light on a mysterious topic?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I had been really interested in this story ever since I first became aware of it. I'm going to say it was around 2018 when I first heard about it. I believe that it got its first reprinting in 2012. Didn't quite get the attention it deserved. Started getting more attention around 2018, 2019, when it would have been its bicentennial. But so I started getting really interested in this story. I wrote some things that I never did anything with. I gave a couple presentations on it. And this past year, I started working on a longer paper that was comparing Blackula to the Black Vampire. And in the course of doing that, somehow I came across several poems by D'Arcy that you mentioned that have never been reprinted. And so I thought, well, together with some of the other works I had been writing about the Black Vampire, some of my own curiosity about who the author actually is, and then these poems that have never seen the light of day in 200 years, maybe this is good content for people who might be interested in this first Black Vampire. And like you said, the first American vampire.
So you really became interested and aware in 2018. What was it about 2019, 2020 that kind of brought this old book from previous century into the public spotlight, or at least the scholarly spotlight?
The way I will tell my experience with it was there was Flaherty and White were two scholars. They ran a program called Just Teach One. They did a reprinting of it in 2018, just ahead of the 200th birthday of the Black Vampire. And that's how it came to my attention. And I think that's how it came to a lot of people's attention who are interested in vampires, because I will tell you, when this book started to get more attention in 2018, a lot of people who do what I do all kind of together in unison said, holy shit, this is a thing. And some people didn't even believe it was real. There were people who thought that this whole thing was a hoax, that the novella never really existed except as a joke that was printed very, very recently. But as I show in my reprinting, I republished some ads from 1819 where it is trying to be advertised and sold by local booksellers.
Where'd you find those ads?
In newspapers from primarily in New England, but the furthest away one I found was in South Carolina. Someone was advertising the book for sale, quite often in tandem with Polidori's The Vampire, which had come out just a couple of months before The Black Vampire came out. And for those who already have read The Black Vampire, they'll know that it is written largely as a response to Polidori's The Vampire, which would hold the title as the first piece of vampire prose fiction, at least in English.
Yeah. We're going to get into depth on that subject, but it is important that you did debunk this supposed fraud by finding these old advertisements, proving that, yes, this book was published, it was released to the public back in 1819. Now, the author's name, Uriah Derrick D'Arcy, that is a pseudonym. Do we know the author's real name, real identity?
There is no smoking gun that absolutely proves it. The two leading candidates are Robert Sands and a gentleman named Richard Varick Day. Now, when the Black Vampire first got reprinted for the very first time in 1845, it was attributed to Robert Sands. There is no direct line that I can see that definitely makes it his. Just like there's no smoking gun that I can see that definitely makes it the work of Richard Varick Day. They are both good candidates. They both write in a similar style. They were both in that New York literary scene at the time. A strong case was made by one scholar who found that, Katie Bray is her name. She noticed that Richard Varick Day is an anagram for Uriah Derrick D'Arcy. And that is very striking and very intriguing, but I don't think it's the smoking gun. And until we can maybe find some, personal papers of Richard Varick Day or Robert Sands, or maybe somebody else, and I don't know that we can say with certainty who Uriah Derrick D'Arcy really is. I think that one could probably reasonably suspect some other people who would have been in the New York literary scene, and I name a couple of them in the book. But again, there's nothing that really binds any of these people to that name. It's all kind of suggestion right now.
Robert Sands and Richard Varick Day, were they African American?
No. Very white guys, both educated at Columbia In fact, they were classmates. They would have graduated the same year. I would love to find out that Uriah Derrick D'Arcy was actually a black man or a black woman who was writing at the time. It doesn't seem likely. It seems that the most likely candidate is a white man. And that's based on the publications that were printing them and the other types of works Uriah Derrick D'Arcy was doing. If you look at some of the other poems, that doesn't seem like the experience of a black writer in the early 1800s. The other poems do not feel that way.
Outside of Sands and Richard Varick Day, other potential candidates for who this person really was?
Well, like I said, I can't prove anything, but there were two writers that together were called the Croakers, and they were quite often, how would I say this? Not parody writers, but they were absurdists. They were kind of cynical writers, maybe the Andy Rooney of their days. Their style was not unlike what you see in the Black Vampyre. They possibly could have been one of the writers for the Black Vampyre. And I thought it was interesting that the last thing you ever see of Uriah Derrick D'Arcy published originally was in 1820. That's the same year that one of the Croakers dies and will never publish again. None of this ties them to it, but when I noticed that and I noticed some similarities, I thought, well, this is something that a good literary detective might want to try running down and at least eliminating.
The two Croakers, and I assume that's a nickname or maybe it's a last name.
Mm-hmm.
Were they related to each other? Were they brothers?
No, they, to my knowledge, they were not related. I suppose it is possible there's some sort of cousin relation. But they would have been writing around the same time. All these folks, Richard Varick Day, Robert Sands, the Croakers, and the whole Knickerbocker scene, which would have included Washington Irving, they would have all been part of this same literary scene in New York around the 1810s, 1820s. And as far as who the Croakers were, Joseph Rodman Drake and Fitzgreen Halleck would have been who their real names were. And they went as the Croakers. Sometimes they went as Croaker Jr., but some variation on that.
You mentioned the Knickerbocker. That was a literary magazine?
It was a literary magazine. It was also a group. The Knickerbocker group was I don't want to put too much of an Algonquin roundtable aspect to it, but it was a group of writers that were kind of all coming up at the same time. You have to understand that 1819, there was not really a literary tradition in America yet. We did not have our Walt Whitman just yet. Washington Irving would have been the best known writer, and he was barely making a living. You couldn't really make a living as a writer, a fiction writer, in America at that time. We were still, as a country, trying to find our voice. And the Knickerbocker group was kind of almost a juvenile version of a more advanced literary scene. They were trying to figure out, what is it to be American? What is the voice of America? I think they were still trying to figure that out.
Interesting. So you sent me a copy of this a few weeks ago, and I was able to read it in advance of the interview that we're doing right now. The book is only like 20 pages or so, at least in this format of the book. But even though it's a short story, it's pretty complicated and it's pretty wild. If you would give us, Brian, kind of a short summary of what is happening, what the storyline of this book is.
You're right. A lot happens in a short amount of time. And let me preface it by saying that the second edition of the Black Vampyre, and that's what's reprinted here, is probably about half of the book that I sent you. It's about 50 or so pages. But you're right. The part that is the Black Vampyre is only a portion of that. The rest of it is D'Arcy prologuing and afterwording and making his own arguments about other complaints he has and writing a few poems. But concentrating on just the Black Vampyre part, the Wikipedia version is we have a derelict slave ship that arrives on the shores of Saint Domingue, what we'd call Haiti today. Aboard it is only one surviving passenger, a young African child who's been sold into slavery. The person who would plan to purchase him decides that this kid is not even worth living. He's sickly, he's gaunt. Everyone else on the ship is dead. He's probably diseased. Attempts to kill the child several times, is completely unsuccessful, and almost in a darkly humorous way, completely unsuccessful in killing a small child. Instead, this slave owner ends up dying himself when he accidentally trips into a fire, burns up to death. Now we fast forward 20 or so years. The same slave child comes back. He is now grown up. He now represents himself to be a slave trader himself, and he woos the widow of that same slave owner. Then he reveals that he is a vampire. He turns her into a vampire. He digs up the slave owner, turns the slave owner into a vampire, makes the slave owner, who is now a vampire, fight for his amusement. He then tells them, I am shipping you back to Europe where you belong. You have to leave these shores. But before he does that, they all go to a cavern where a meeting is taking place. It is a meeting of enslaved people and even a few vampires, where our starring vampire, our eponymous Black Vampyre, gives a really rousing speech, a speech calling for the breaking of chains, the unfettering of bonds, and universal emancipation. It's at that point that the French soldiers come in and start shooting. They are, of course, completely unsuccessful in killing vampires. The vampires fall over and they bounce right back up like those punching bag toys that kids used to have.
Yeah.
It's a comical scene.
Yeah.
Eventually, the soldiers do figure out how to kill a vampire with a stake. They stake the vampires. It's our first time we see vampires staked in fiction. And the white slave-owning power structure is restored, which is kind of a grim way to end this, except that Darcy tells us that the Black Vampyre has left behind a pregnant widow, and she gives birth to a half vampire who Darcy tells us is still around today. We don't get his story. We just know he's out there somewhere.
Right. The name of the slave owner that we're introduced to at the very beginning, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Mr. Person or Persone, it's spelled Personne. Is that just supposed to represent like a general person?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the benefit of not having to say that name very often, just write it. So I've said Persone in my head. And yes, it just means it's Mr. Man.
Yeah.
And it's curious
name.
because, the widow gets a name. The widow gets the name Euphemia. Their child gets a name. The Black Vampyre himself, the eponymous Black Vampyre, is only referred to as the Prince.
Right.
We don't have a name for him. We just know that he is either a prince or is representing himself to be a prince.
One of the things that you talk about in the introduction you write, where you describe America's first vampire, and it's a great essay that you put together.
Thank you so much.
And you say, Darcy checked all of these boxes. The first time a vampire turns another human into a vampire. The first time we have multiple vampires in a single story. The first time a cure for vampirism is deployed. The first child of a vampire and a human. And in parentheses, you write, sorry, Twilighters. Also, the first male-on-male vampire bite. Also, no big deal, but the first time a vampire is killed with a stake through the heart, which you just mentioned a moment ago. And then at the very end, you write, that's before we get to the first interracial marriage in fiction. So these are all firsts that you describe. It's about 7 different firsts that came from Mr. Darcy.
And not to put too fine of a point on it, Bruce, but this is quite possibly also the first abolitionist anti-slavery fiction in America. That is a debatable point. I think when I first read this story, I thought maybe it was pro-slavery because it's, as you said, there's parts that are uneven. There's a lot going on in the story. But the more I read it, the more I came around to, no, this is an anti-slavery tale that just has some unevenness in it that makes us wonder what the message really is.
Yeah. Now, Brian, this lead character, the prince, who is introduced to us as a young child coming off the ship, the only survivor, he is then killed, or at least there's an attempt to kill him, but he does come back as a vampire. He is attacked, of course, by Mr. Person, and then he does come back very quickly as a vampire, kills Mr. Person. And then, as you said, years later, this young boy now is the prince. He is a vampire. So he's really the lead. Is he a true villain, or is he a character to be sympathized with, or is it a little bit of both?
He is a bit of an anti-hero. He's certainly on the right side of history when it comes to ending slavery, but he does do some kind of nasty things along the way. I think you can grade him on a curve, though. How bad is it to be nasty to some slave owners, especially ones that tried to kill you? Are we going to hold him to account for that? Not really, I don't think. Having said that, he does have some villainous tendencies, but I think on balance, he comes off as more of a heroic side of the anti-hero.
Mm-hmm. So if we're looking for a true villain here, I guess you could say it's Mr. Person, but he's eliminated very quickly. So true villains, they usually persist throughout the story. They're the antagonists. They kind of keep our interest. That's not what goes on here. It's not a traditional story in any way.
No, I think the villain here is the system. Think of it in terms of The Wire. Yes, you have gotten rid of a slave owner, but slavery continues, and that is what the vampire, the prince, and others are trying to overcome towards the end of the story when they are thwarted by the system, which wins, at least in this story.
Brian, how should we feel about Mr. Person's widow, Euphemia?
This is a really good question because the way it's written in the story, it's hard not to feel some sympathy for her.
Mm-hmm.
But if you reflect on her outside of that, you think, well, she is certainly a beneficiary of this horrible institution. She is continuing to live off the largesse of a slave plantation. Do we owe her sympathy for that? Even if she's turned into a vampire against her will, do we owe her much sympathy? I think a lot of people would rightly say, no, she doesn't deserve our sympathy, even though she's kind of written as a sympathetic character, and it's hard to read the words and not feel a little bit of sympathy for her.
Yeah. All right, Brian, let's get into the reasons why D'Arcy wrote this tale. And there's multiple layers to this, but first and foremost, you say in your text, this is a direct and somewhat critical response to John Polidori's book, The Vampire, which came out only 4 months earlier. I guess my question is, why? Why did this author, I guess, show some disdain or some lack of respect for Polidori? What was his message? What was his beef with Polidori?
So this becomes a much bigger conversation because, as we mentioned a minute ago, the actual narrative of the Black Vampire is pretty short, and then double that again, and you see all this other material that D'Arcy included. The other material that he included, he doesn't talk about slavery. He doesn't talk about black and white relations. His beef with all the extra textual material is all about authorship and plagiarism and literary integrity. And because of that, I think he chooses Polidori because at the time of his writing in 1819, there is still a little bit of a question on who actually wrote The Vampire. Was it Lord Byron? Was it John Polidori? Was John Polidori trying to steal glory from Lord Byron? Was Lord Byron stealing glory from Polidori? And this is all against the backdrop of a lot of literary theft happening across the Atlantic. Uh, American publishers are picking up well-known books, publishing them for pennies on the dollar and selling them to Americans. American authors can't get any kind of traction. How can you as an American author when you're competing with the Jane Austens and the Mary Shelleys of the world who are writing big hits? I'm exaggerating because I don't think Frankenstein was out yet, but Ivanhoe would have been the bestseller at the time. If people can buy Ivanhoe for pennies instead of full price, why would they pay you, you lowly American author, full price for your work? So he has a big gripe with all of that. And I think that the controversy over the authorship of Polidori's Vampire just played right into his hands. I wonder, and I can't prove this, Bruce, this is just me hypothesizing, if Uriah Derrick D'Arcy set out to write this initially as a vampire story to cash in on the popularity of the vampire with his own spin on it. And then in his second edition, he included all this extra material because he wanted to expand it. He said, I'm not happy with just writing a vampire story. I want to write a story that is a bigger commentary on my gripes and my complaints of the world. So instead of changing the story, he just added a lot of extra textual material and said, hey, that story that you saw, and you saw it as a commentary on slavery, I'm going to try to put it through a different lens. And I think we as readers get to decide, well, do we honor that? Or do we just look at the narrative and say, this is not about literary theft. This is about slavery. I'm one of those who reads the narrative and says, this is about slavery. And if you want to pretend it's about literary theft, have at it. It's your story, Mr. D'Arcy. But just reading the narrative and not your director commentary, if you will, I'm not seeing any of that.
Brian, going back to Polidori's The Vampire, what did Lord Byron have to say about it? Did he claim, hey, this is my book, this is not Polidori's, or did he stay silent on this?
He actually was kind of mean about it. He said that it is not his, to his credit, even though it was a hot seller. He said, no, I am not the author of that. But then he couldn't leave it at that. He couldn't just let Polidori have it. He started saying, this is a piece of shit work. And why would anyone think that this is me? And if I actually knew a vampire, I certainly would not divulge their secrets. So he couldn't even let Polidori have that. He had to be kind of a dick about it. To my knowledge, neither him nor Polidori ever saw the Black Vampire. I'd love to know any evidence that they did, but I've not found anything that suggests they ever knew it existed.
I'm curious what your opinion is on Polidori's book. What do you think of The Vampire?
I quite like it. It is a little more difficult to read some of that prose from 1819, but I think you have to recognize what an accomplishment it was. We don't have vampires like we have now without it. He set the tone for what we would call a Byronic vampire, the gentleman vampire, the noble vampire, the one who is magnetic and charming and handsome and probably wealthy. That all comes from Polidori. Before Polidori, vampires would have been gross. They would have been zombies with a brain. Zombies who were had some of their own consciousness. He changes that, and it was obviously a hit at the time. Not only did it sell really well, it created lots and lots of imitators, D'Arcy being only one of them. There were the French theater exploded with different takes on Polidori's version of the vampire. His character was named Lord Riven. And until Dracula came around, not quite a century later, Lord Riven was the vampire. He appeared over and over again. People kept reusing the character. No royalties for Polidori, but that character continued to get used the way that Dracula would be used throughout the 20th and 21st century. He was everywhere. And then Dracula doesn't get written. Dracula does not get written without Polidori's vampire. And of course, without Dracula, none of us are interested in vampires now. They might just be relegated to kind of a a side monster that no one thinks that much about.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let's get back to the issue of slavery. You said when you first read The Black Vampire, you thought it was sort of pro-slavery, then you had a rethinking, maybe it's
Hmm.
anti-slavery. So you've kind of gone back and forth. I guess this is really open to interpretation based on the reader.
Yeah, and I still think someone could make an honest argument that maybe it was either pro-slavery or at least tolerant of slavery. I could see that argument getting made.
Yeah.
I don't buy it, but I'll tell you why I thought it. Um, the story takes place in Haiti. Haiti had already had the one and only fully successful slave revolt in human history. It was no longer a slave state by the time the Black Vampire was written, but the Black Vampire sets their story in Haiti, and they have the slave state win in the end. The revolt is not successful. So it almost reads like it's fan fiction, like, oh, if only that revolution had been put down. I now think that that was me being rushing to judgment, because the speech that the prince gives is incredibly impassioned. It never gets rebutted. No one stands up to refute him and give the other side. And I'm proud of this, Bruce. I figured out that at least a couple of lines in his speech are pulled directly from speeches by abolitionist lawyers.
Hmm.
So Darcy, whoever he was well read enough to know some of these goings on and some of these speeches that are being delivered in cases trying to free people from slavery, and he cribs them for his own use. So I feel like this is meant to be an anti-slavery story in the end. It's just a little bit messy. And I
Yeah.
can give it a little bit of leeway on that, because if it is anti-slavery, it would be the first American anti-slavery fiction anywhere, which means it didn't have any kind of guidance to go by. Just
Hmm.
like the vampire novel that started way back then doesn't look exactly like the vampire novel today. It had to go through some evolutions. Authors had to try some things and see what
Right.
worked and what didn't work. I think anti-slavery fiction had to do the same thing.
Now, in your edition of the book, after your introductory essay, which is terrific, then you have another essay titled 1819 in a Snapshot. And you tell us what America is like in 1819. So I'm curious, what was the critical reaction to the book at this time?
Very little. There was, I found 4 critical reviews of the book, and they were a bit uneven. One was highly praising the book, almost too much, to the point that you start to think, oh, was this guy on the payroll? Is this guy a buddy of Darcy's? 2 which were critical of it, but also at the same time, critical in a way that you think, was this like somebody saying that the Rolling Stones are filth? You definitely shouldn't go see their very sexy, incredibly raucous, good time rock and roll show. It will corrupt you and make you have way too much fun. That's kind of way the critical reviews feel.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder if this incestuous New York literary scene that was burgeoning at the time, if everyone was friends with each other and the reviews were, I don't want to say planted, but kind of done with a wink and a nod.
Yeah. I take it the book didn't sell a lot of copies.
I don't have any information on how much it sold, and
Hmm.
I don't know that anyone has any information on how much it sold.
Okay.
It clearly didn't sell enough that it was remembered well later. There's precious few copies still in existence. I think I've heard of 2. I think the American Antiquarian Society has one, and I've heard of one that is in private hands somewhere. But clearly, it didn't sell enough that there's that many surviving copies. It wasn't written about or commented on by other novelists. We don't see it referenced in later vampire works.
Yeah.
There's a couple, as you might read it as a vampire story, there's a few things that Darcy experiments with that don't catch on in other vampire stories. The staking clearly is a thing that gets picked up by later writers. But for example, in Darcy's story, a vampire can be created by a corpse that's been in the ground for years. In most of the vampire fiction we would be familiar with, that doesn't work. You don't dig up a body that's been in the ground for 10 years and then reanimate it and make it a vampire. No, you take a living human being and turn them into a vampire somehow. So that's one example of kind of a dead branch that Darcy was experimenting with. Things like that never get picked up. So it does not appear to have been a very influential book at the time.
Yeah.
I think its rediscovery now is probably made it way more popular than it ever was at the time.
Brian, do we know if it went out of print very quickly?
I do not see it advertised after 1820.
Okay.
So no, I do not think it is printed very long. And in fact, it seems to have been self-printed, or it is advertised as printed for the author. So not the sort of thing that has the backing of a big publishing house or anything like that.
We continue our interview with our friend Brian Forrest, also known as Toothpickings. He has just come out with a new edition of this book, The Black Vampyre, and other writings by Uriah Derrick D'Arcy. It is available from FMI Press, new as of 2026. It's received some positive reviews. Joan Torres, co-author of Blackula, 1972 book, has written a sanguine and informed read laced with humor and interesting historical details by vampire expert Brian Forrest. So that's a nice review there. Brian, as we continue, this book, it's not an easy read for us today. It was not an easy read for me, even though the main story is about 20 pages. It took a while.
Yes.
You know, sometimes you could read 20. I could read 20 pages in a day, although I tend to read 10, maybe 15. This took me 4 or 5 days because of the style of the book. It has that flowery language of the early 19th century. So my question is, how can readers today, how can they counteract that? How do they make themselves used to that and get through it to make it a little bit easier experience?
Well, I'll tell you what my cheats are when I have to read fiction from this era. I get an idea of a summary of the book ahead of time, and it helps me track what's going on. And I can assure readers of The Black Vampyre, this is not one of those stories that rewards you for not having it spoiled for you. It's okay for this story to be spoiled. You can appreciate everything that happens in it, even if you know how it's all going to end. So you could take the very short summary that I gave you at the top of this interview, or just go out and read about it on anywhere on the internet to get an idea of the kind of the contours and the plot points. And then as you're reading, it will not stump you as much what is actually going on and what's being said. And the other thing I would say is, because it's only a 20-page story, it might be easier for people, myself included, on a first read to kind of scan it and not worry about understanding every single little thing and getting hung up on every detail. Because even as many times as I have read it, I find myself realizing things on later reads.
Yeah.
And I think that would be fine and rewarding for anybody who's going to read it. There's comedy in this piece, but it's hard to pick up on the first read.
Yeah.
And it's not until I read it again, like, oh, I get it. This is a joke.
Right.
So it's fine. It's fine. Don't feel like you have to parse every single sentence in a book like this. It is written for an audience of well-read, college-educated people in 1819. They had a different way of speaking. They wanted to show off a little bit. We have different standards, and that's fine.
Well, that was my first mistake. I didn't read a summary of the book ahead of time, so I was a little bit confused, and I had to reread and go through. And then toward the end, I did read some summaries, and that helped me understand what exactly was transpiring. Might it also help if somebody reading this book now would have some sort of historical dictionary with them, because some of the terms are not everyday language in 2026 here in America.
That's a good point. A good example is that the word Holocaust comes up at one point. And I was not familiar with that word outside of the way that you and I would normally use it, but it's got a completely different meaning in the 1800s than it does now. Unless you really are committed to getting down in the weeds with this book, I don't know that it's worth it to do that.
Yeah.
I think if you come across something that you cannot figure out what is happening in the scene without knowing that word, sure, look that word up. But I think most of the time you can read past it and figure out what's going on through context.
In the 19th century, did a Holocaust refer to a fire? Was that what it was?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it would have been a fire.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason I know that is from an episode of MASH where Radar is referring to the Holocaust, and he mispronounces the word, and he asks Hawkeye what it is. And first Hawkeye explains to him that he's not pronouncing it right. And then he says, yeah, it's a great fire. So the way that Hawkeye explains is the fire, not the reference to what happened in Nazi Germany. So that's why I thought maybe it was a fire that they were referring to back in the 1800s.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, Brian, as you look at this book, and then you consider you knew the man who directed Black Vampyre, another famous Black Vampire. The first film came out 1972. The follow-up came out in 1973. In fact, the very day that we're doing this recording, this is the anniversary of Scream, Blackula, Scream coming out this very day, 53 years ago, 1973. That's just a coincidence.
Goodness, thank you for that reminder. Thank you for that reminder, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, because you did know the late William Crane, you talked to him extensively. Was he aware of this book, The Black Vampyre? Was this any kind of influence on him, or was he just not aware of this at all?
Great question. This is the exact presentation that I am preparing this weekend.
Wow.
So you will have to stop me if I go on too long about this. The short answer is no. He was not aware of it when they were making this film. This book, The Black Vampyre, was so obscure that even if someone on the crew had known about it, I don't know how they would have gotten a copy. It was not in print. You couldn't buy it in stores. It wasn't in the library. The founders of Google had not been born yet. There was no way to find this book, even if you knew it existed. So there's no way it could have influenced Blackula. But strangely, there are an alarming number of parallels between Blackula and the Black Vampyre. So many so that you can't just say, oh, this is a vampire film. So of course there's going to be a stake. Of course there'll be a reference to a bat and fangs. Beyond all of that, there are more similarities than I could enumerate on two hands. Big things and little things, big thematic things, and then just little things that pop up that are striking, and how many similarities there were between Blackula and the Black Vampyre. But if I'm answering your original question, Crane had heard about it by the time I had met him, but he had not read it. Joan Torres, the writer of Blackula, had never heard of the Black Vampyre until I asked her about it directly.
Wow. It's kind of amazing that, even though Crane was not aware, he's still exploring some of these same themes that were being talked about by this writer D'Arcy back in 1819. It's kind of incredible.
It's true. It's true. It's interesting to me that both of these vampires are African princes who are transported across the Atlantic against their will, obviously. And they meet a very similar end. And along the way, they kind of hit, I don't want to say similar plot points because the plots do not resemble each other, but little moments that pop up are echoed in both stories. And it's just shocking to me because it didn't have to be that way. Yeah. But yet, both storytellers came to this conclusion that, oh, if we're going to start here and end here, we need to have this, we need to have that. They both came to that conclusion.
Yeah. Brian, do you think that a modern day filmmaker might be able to do something with this story, or is it just so wild and so crazy that that just might not be feasible?
Oh, I absolutely think someone could. You
Yeah.
would have to change the story. The adaptation would have to be a little more even in what its message is and be a little
Yeah.
more certain about where it's trying to go. But I think you could absolutely take the broad contours of it and make it into a story. I'd love to see someone do it as a comic book, frankly. I think you could get a lot of mileage out of something like that.
Well, not to give you another job, but maybe this is something for you to do.
Oh, you'll be waiting a long time if you wait for me to get my art correct and consistent. Unless you want
Yeah.
every panel, every person in every panel to look different than they did in the previous panel.
Right. Well, if you were to make a film out of it, you're going to have to, I guess, flesh out the story, no pun intended, because, it is what, 20, 28 pages, something like that. I mean, depending on
Mhm.
how much text you put on each page, of course.
But like you said, a lot happens on each page. I
Yeah.
think one could probably expand this without adding too much.
Mm.
But yeah, I would love to see. One of the questions I have, Bruce, on this is that I would love to know exactly when he became a vampire. My hypothesis is that he became infected with vampirism while he was on that slave ship crossing the Atlantic. Can't prove it because it's not there in the text. We don't know for sure, but that is my suspicion that he was forced onto the ship as a human and became a vampire on the way over. And all the other people who were on board that ship are dead because he was a vampire or because there was another vampire on the ship at some point. Uh, I would love
Perhaps
to
he
see that
killed all
fleshed
of
out.
them.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
That could be the case.
I mean, he was
But
a boy at
you were
that
saying.
time, but, if you're a boy or a man and you have vampiric powers, does it really matter?
That's right.
Yeah.
The fact that he's so listless, and he seems almost
Mm.
shell shocked in that opening scene makes me wonder if he was just turned into a vampire and he's still trying to figure out where his feet are. He
Yeah.
doesn't attack anybody. Person basically kills himself on accident. It's not the prince who does it. That's why I kind of have this feeling, and maybe I'm just trying to square the circle on my own, but that's why I have a feeling that perhaps there was another vampire on board who killed everyone except him, except the
Yeah.
prince, and turned the prince, but the prince is unclear on what to do next. And that's why
Right.
he's so kind of got that 1,000 yard stare in that opening scene. And while
Mm.
he's impervious to being killed, he doesn't retaliate. He doesn't seem to know what to do.
Now, in your edition of the book, you do include many other examples of Darcy's writings. There's poetry. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there are 6 poems altogether. 4 of them have never been reprinted before. Those are the 4 that I found. Uh, they are very, very different from the Black Vampire. One of them is called A Description of the Former Ascension of the Balloon. This requires a little bit of context. Around this time in American history, hot air balloons were all the rage. It was a new thing. In fact, there had just been a big riot where some people were either going to go up in a balloon or they wanted to watch hot air balloons, and they were fenced out. They were not allowed in. And this is the kind of things, I guess we didn't have video games yet, so this was what was entertaining at the time. But he celebrates it and he uses this rousing language around it. And then he has another one that is sort of a celebration of a bucolic rural lifestyle. It would fit in very well with even today those who would like to sort of idealize
Hmm.
a lifestyle of a farm family who lives off the land. Another one called The Female Slanderer sounds like it's going to be terribly misogynistic. It's it's more of a pointed direction at one person who is, a former lover. We've seen that story before. You broke my heart. How dare you, you liar? The
Yeah.
really interesting one, Bruce, it's only titled Ode. And
Hmm.
in it, whoever is writing, I think it's D'Arcy, is talking about the street sweepers in New York. And you really have to read between the lines and ask yourself, is this racist or is it a celebration? It goes back and forth, just like the Black Vampyre seems uneven in places. Also, Ode at times seems like, oh, that is not the kind of language you should be using about Black street sweepers. But then in the next line, a righteous celebration of, if it weren't for you, this place would be awful and you deserve more recognition for what you do.
Yeah.
It goes back and forth. It really does, just like the Black Vampyre. And this could just simply be a case of a young writer who has not quite figured out the right way to address the subjects and maybe not quite figured out the way to stick to a theme. If you found some of the stuff I wrote when I was in my 20s, I would be horribly embarrassed too. Maybe this writer was in the same boat.
Yeah. Although we tend to be pretty hard on ourselves looking back at what we've written. Sometimes we're too hard.
Right? If anyone's talking about the stuff we wrote 200 years from now, I think we will feel a lot better about it.
Yeah, yeah. We have a few minutes remaining with our guest Toothpickings, also known as Brian Forrest, not known as Uriah Derrick D'Arcy. I want to confuse that. I want to mention some other subjects, and I talked about this a moment ago. As we speak, this is the 53rd anniversary of the sequel, Scream Blackula Scream. The very first time we had you on the Ghostly Gallery, you had mentioned to me that you're not that fond of this film. You really liked the original Blackula a lot better. And as I recall, you felt that the sequel was maybe a little too slick, a little too well produced, didn't have the grittiness. Am I remembering that right? Didn't have the grittiness of the original?
No, I like the production value of the sequel. I wish that the original had that production value because I think it does look better and it does sound better. And I wish that they had that budget on the original to get that kind of production value. So no, I'm definitely I would not criticize it over being too slick looking. I think it kind of lost the plot a little bit on what Blackula was supposed to be about. It could have been a completely new story, and maybe I would not even bristle at all if it had just been a completely different Black Vampyre set in LA. But there's almost no continuity with the original apart from the leading actor. There's a lot of Star Wars fans who got really mad at the unevenness of the new sequel trilogy and how it started out one way and then it kind of changed directions and then it changed directions again. I guess that is one of the gripes I have with Scream Blackula Scream is whatever they could have built upon from the original, they threw out and scrapped it. And that's evident in the fact that they got rid of the director and they got rid of the original writers who created that character. They're credited, but they had almost nothing to do with that sequel.
Yeah. One of the things that's good about it, it does give us Pam Grier.
Excellent performance by Pam Grier. Yes, that is maybe the biggest selling point of it. She's fantastic.
Yeah. Also kind of interesting, a very young Craig T. Nelson. I believe this was his premiere in a film, his first feature film.
And I think you may have been the one to point that out to me, Bruce. I think I had a blind spot for that. And I think you were the one who said Craig T. Nelson's in it. And I said, well, I got to go back and check that because I did not recognize him.
Yeah, I think he's a policeman. It's not a big role. And I don't know that he says a lot. I liked him. Of course, he was in Poltergeist, which is an absolute classic. And he also did a TV show that has nothing to do with horror or sci-fi or anything like that. The District, which I think was only on for 3 years, but I thought was an excellent show, and he was great in that. He, of course, did Coach back in the 1980s, has become a very fine actor. I don't know that we knew that was going to happen back then, and I don't think he was given that much to do in Scream Blackula Scream, but it is interesting that he appears in it.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the original, which is 1 year earlier, 1972, we've talked in the past about the possibility of a remake of Blackula. Do you see that happening in the next 5-10 years? Any chance?
It gets rumored every year, and then every year it gets postponed. I will see a press release. They're like, it's happening. Blackula is getting remade, and then crickets.
Yeah.
So just like with Robert Eggers' version of Nosferatu, I'll believe it when I see it, because that was also, if you recall, it was going to happen. It was this year. No, it's going to be delayed. It's going to be another year. Oh, maybe it's not going to happen at all. Well,
Yeah.
I'll believe it when I see it. I would love to see it redone well. I think I've expressed this fear to you. I'm afraid that someone is going to make it into more of a comedy than what it should be. The Black Vampyre is a horror comedy, for sure. Blackula is not. Blackula takes itself seriously, despite its name, which does sound like a horror comedy, I will admit. But it is a serious film that has a few moments of levity, not a comedy. And I fear that someone's going to take it and be like, hey, let's do the version that everyone thinks Blackula is. Let's do this kind of winky parody of a blaxploitation picture, which is just not what Blackula is at all.
I also wonder, Brian, who they would get to play the role. Now, if this were a few years ago, somebody like Tony Todd, I think would have been a natural. He was so good in Candyman. Of course, he did pass away. I think it's 2 or 3 years now. He would have been a logical candidate. I'm not sure who they would go to now.
That's a tough one. I always thought if they had gotten on the ball 20 years ago, Denzel would have been perfect. But now, gosh, I miss Chadwick Boseman so much. I would have loved to have seen him in that role. There are other fine actors out there, but we might not know the name of the right Blackula actor. And I say that because I think you go two ways with casting Mama Walde again. And either you go Shakespearean, just like they did with William Marshall. And I don't know that we know who the next big Black Shakespearean actor is. At least not a household name. I'm sure he's out there. Theater goers might know who he is. I don't know who he is. Or I think an alternative way to go, and what I think might be interesting, is to not make them Shakespearean. Have it be an African actor. Mama Walde is supposed to be an African prince. Why not an African actor, or at least a very capable actor who can play African? After seeing Chadwick Boseman play the Black Panther, that would make complete sense. I can totally see his version of T'Challa. Imagining him playing T'Challa, but put him in a cape and now he's a vampire. I can absolutely envision it, and I think it would be fantastic. But it's going to depend on the way that the director and the studio decide to go with that, if they get so far as to make it.
One possibility that comes to mind, and he's already played a vampire from Sinners, Michael B. Jordan.
He'd be great. I don't think he's going to revisit the vampire. I think after Sinners, what's he going to prove? And he has explored that. He has won the awards. He's made one of the top grossing vampire films of all time. There's nothing in him for it to revisit being a vampire again, I don't think.
Well, if they offer enough money,
you know what?
Make up for it.
Make us studio executives and we'll tell you. That's just my 2 cents.
Brian, before I let you go, one other topic I wanted to mention. I don't know if you had a chance to see the new Dracula film. Tracy and I talked about it shortly after it came out a few months ago. This is the one directed by Luc Besson. Have you seen it, A? And B, did you like it?
Am I allowed to be frank with you, Bruce?
Sure.
I detested every decision I ever made that led me into that theater. I thought it was a train wreck of a movie. Yes, I did not like it at all. I left going, is this a comedy? Is this a horror? What the heck is this supposed to be? So many moments that took me out of the film. And I say that as someone who was okay with some of the acting choices. I'm going to get real fuzzy on some actors' names, but the lady who played the sort of female version of Renfield was fantastic. Our priest was great. I thought having the Van Helsing character as a priest was a really interesting and good choice. And the scene in the convent was horrific. But what happened with the rest of the movie? These are like scenes from 5 different movies that all got edited together, and it's just all over the place. Yeah, I'm sorry, big world, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you saw it, it was not for me.
Yeah, Tracy and I generally did like it. It certainly was different in many ways. Maybe there was too much of an emphasis on the love story. In fact, the full title is Dracula: A Love Tale.
Mhm.
And that's always a questionable decision when you try to make Dracula romantic and a love story, because that really was not Stoker's intention.
Right.
The gentleman who played the priest, Christoph Waltz,
Thank
I
you.
thought was terrific. The actors you mentioned also very good. It took some chances. Some of the chances you weren't sure, are they trying to be funny? Are they not trying to be funny? They may have missed with those, but I thought it was creative, and I thought that some of the creativity worked, and it was something
Mhm.
different. It took Dracula in a varied direction. I thought it was kind of interesting. So yeah, Tracy and I both liked it. As a result of your opinion, we're never going to have you on again. Just kidding on that.
Oh,
But
sorry about that.
no, it's always good to hear divergent opinions on the film. You're the expert on vampires. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. You obviously did not care for it. But the good thing about Dracula is we're never too far away from the next adaptation, and that may be one that you do like.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've been spoiled with some very good vampire films in the past couple years, from Sinners and Nosferatu and the new Lestat that's on TV now. We've just been uh we've had an embarrassment of riches of
Yeah.
really good vampire media. And I guess for me, this one was a strikeout, but that's okay. We're still hitting home runs with a lot of these other films.
Our guest is the expert, Brian Forrest, expert on vampires. He has written many articles. He has written for Tucker Christine's Dracula Beyond Stoker, and he has come out with this new edition of The Black Vampire, a book originally published back in 1819. Brian offering his edited version, also some wonderful essays explaining his thoughts, his scholarly interpretation of this book. And it's a book that's now getting some attention after being relatively forgotten for so many years. Brian, for those who would like to get it, I assume it's at Amazon. Are you offering anything at your website or through your Facebook page that people can use to acquire the book?
No, there's no direct link outside of Amazon. Unfortunately, I know not everyone likes to use Amazon. It was the simplest way to get this out. I will have copies if someone runs into me somewhere
Yeah.
at a convention. I will, of course, have copies, and I'd be happy to part with them there.
And you're getting some feedback on it?
So far, yeah, I've been really happy with what I've been hearing about it.
No, that's very good. We're glad to hear it. As always, we appreciate having you on. Thanks, Brian. Great stuff. A lot of interesting information, a lot of stuff that I did not know anything about. Oh, as of 3 weeks ago. So we appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you so much for taking a look at it, Bruce, and thanks for having me on. It's great to chat with you.
And for those on YouTube, I'll hold up a copy of the book. It's a small paperback. It does take a while to get through. You may need to read it a couple of times to really get the full gist of it. But if you're a fan of vampires, as we are, it's worth the effort. Our guest, Brian Forrest, Toothpickings. We appreciate him joining us on this program. As always, we appreciate Tracy Asteria, our co-host and producer, who has been behind the curtain, charting my errors, correcting things as I make mistakes along the way. Actually, no, we don't edit anything like that. If I make a mistake, unless it's brutal, Tracy keeps it out there so that everybody can hear it. Tracy will be back on air soon now that she has settled into her new home. We're glad for that. And on upcoming episodes, we'll talk a bit about Monster Bash, which was a lot of fun. We'll be featuring some interviews with folks that we encountered at Monster Bash, including our friend Gregory Mank, also the son of the late Ted Cassidy, who played Lurch on The Addams Family. I had a really nice talk with Sean Cassidy, his son. Great guy, really nice person. We'll hear from those gentlemen, and we'll hear more about Monster Bash in the coming weeks on this program. We thank all of you for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we do hope we'll see you again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.